All right, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name's Shannon Reisler. I'm a faculty member here at the College of Law, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. I also want to thank our generous sponsors, Fred and Charlotte Hubble. Their generosity, which funds the Hubble Environmental Law Initiative here at the law school, is the reason we can host these wonderful events. And so we welcome all of you today to this book talk. Austin Frerick is an expert on agricultural and antitrust policy. He worked at the Open Markets Institute, the U.S. Department of Treasury, and the Congressional Research Service before becoming a fellow at Yale. He's a seventh-generation Iowan and first-generation college student with degrees from Grinnell College and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. As you all know, last year he published his debut book entitled Barron's: Money, Power, and the Corruption of America's Food Industry. The book, which includes foreword by Eric Schlosser, profiles a series of powerful magnets to illustrate the concentration of power in the global food system. It's a really wonderful read, as again, I think most of you in this room already know. It's received universal acclaim. And I have to say, Austin has also used his agricultural policy knowledge to really do some important advocacy work as well. And we appreciate all that he contributes. So with that, if all the tech is
before we get going, can you raise your
target?
hand if you're from Iowa originally? I'm just curious. Oh, wow. Okay, so I have to say, so I'm from Cedar Rapids and I went to Jefferson. And so to get this talk here today is like kind of a big honor because like growing up, Iowa City was always the cool kid. So like I would come down here on half days, go to Poncheros, go do homework at Panera and think we're really cool. And so this is kind of like, I'm both intimidated, but like such an honor. I also want to echo and thank Fred and Charlotte Hubble for making this possible. And I should say, well, two things on that. Number one, how important that is to have this conversation here. We'll talk about this more in a second, but I view Iowa now as an extraction colony. And so it's so hard to have these conversations over the water crisis in this state. And also, I'm not even joking, this book started because Fred ran for governor in 2018. And I'll talk about this more in my Hawk chapter, but his campaign kind of inspired me to write this book. And finally, I gotta say, my mother's here today, and today is her birthday. So I just wanted to you got to score the brownie points when you can when you get older. But before I get going, I want to flag one review I got. It's my favorite. From the American Conservative saying, quote, every conservative should read this book. I love that because I want to own the middle. I think the system we have now in America is radical. It is radical that one man does 5 million hogs. And so much of what we're talking about is truly bipartisan. And that actually what gives me the most hope right now. Because trust me, these next 20-some slides are going to be pretty dark. But I really do believe you have to have an honest conversation over how we got to this point in order to fix the system. So my book is, I profile 7 robber barons. But here's the thing. They're really just narrative devices to tell the structural stories. Like I'm kind of hiding the vegetable. This book took me 5 years, and partly it was because in college you learn thesis, evidence. And I realized people need story. We're emotional creatures. We need narrative. So like Cargill's my grain baron chapter, but that's really the story of the Farm Bill. So as you read, you kind of notice I'm building on concepts. And the funny thing too about doing this presentation is you hear about, I call it my B-list barons. People tell me about different robber barons I missed. So like in Minnesota, people tell me about a potato baron, private equities and carrots. There's all these different kind of things. So before I get going, I want to show you this slide. Brand new data from USDA. What I realized when I started giving these talks were that in people's back of their mind, I was asking you to pay more for food. In this chart, first of all, this is a good example of how one data set can tell you 2 different stories depending on how you interpret it. Per person, per pupil expenditure, we spend more money on food than most Western democracies. We spend more money than Italians. And anyone that's been in Italy knows what $1 gets you there is very different than $1 here. Here's the thing, what Big Ag, a certain American Needs Farmers organization will always say percent of income. It's a ratio. From what Americans earn, what they spend on food is the lowest in the world. That's factually true. Here's the thing. In econ, there's a term called a Gini coefficient. It's a ratio between the have not. we're one of the worst in the world. For the bottom half of Americans, they have not experienced that income growth, so you cannot be using a measure like that. What matters to them is that per pupil expenditure, and that is where they're being gouged. And here's the thing, we shouldn't be shocked. Concentrated markets gouge. Never forget the goal of any corporate executive is monopoly. You want to engage monopoly practices to lock in your dominance to then rent C. I think the food space is one of the most concentrated spaces in America. I love this Bloomberg law report from like 2 or 3 years ago, where literally right before Thanksgiving, they did a story how every protein in America was under investigation for price fixing except turkey, including salmon and tuna. And then 2 weeks later, turkey was under investigation. Here's the thing, when you have a cartel, it's easy to act like a cartel. And the scary thing now, and you're seeing a lot of this show up in the literature, are the data brokers. It used to be you had to get in a Holiday Inn and you would all kind of collude. Well, now you just share your data and you can collude through the data brokers and you can have that veil of ignorance. And the other paper I want to flex for you is by my buddy Harding. I did this conference at Yale Law School a few years ago on grocery store monopolies. And Pete's a dairyman in Wisconsin, and I asked him to come do a paper. And his paper is how one company has an 85% market share in fluid milk in New England. Here's the thing, I don't need a PhD in economics to know those people are not paying a fair price for milk. But second, what I love about that data is when we talk about food, we tend to use national figures. Food's a regional thing. So you're not going to take milk from Maine and sell it in New Mexico. So a lot of these markets are much more concentrated than we even realize. And so here's, you know that phrase, a picture says 1,000 words? This is the nerd version of it. This graph is from my buddy, Bill Bowler. He's a cattle rancher in Montana, runs RCAP. So this red line is what cattle ranchers get paid for their beef. And then the blue line is what you pay at the store. This is textbook monopoly. You see the divergence in 15, and then at early COVID, you just see the massive monopolistic behavior going on. Where you're paying a ton for beef in the store and the cattle ranchers getting nothing. The only reason why this market tightened, I've been told, is the cattle herd's collapsing right now in America because of the climate crisis. And so there's like the American cattle herd is now at like 1960 levels. So that's why that market's tightened. And then finally, McDonald's is the world's largest buyer of beef. And usually for most businesses, you treat your best customer the best way possible. Well, McDonald's this fall filed a lawsuit against the beef packers for price gouging. Finally, this is actually Iowa Law grad. I believe she was the editor of the journal, Kate Conlow. I asked Kate at the grocery conference I did to do a paper on, when I wrote this book, what I realized is every commodity has their go-to corrupt academic, to be blunt, who always writes literature in favor of the industry. And Kate did this paper where there's a great documentary called Inside Job, How the Great Recession Happened. And one of the things they discovered were a lot of the literature justifying deregulation was financed by industry and it wasn't disclosed. So a lot of economic journals enacted disclosure policies. What Kate did is, it turns out ag economics, I personally think it's one of the most corrupt disciplines right now in America. You have academics bragging about how much corporate money they're taking on their websites, and certain academic, Timothy Richards at Arizona State, who is an editor of a journal, doesn't enforce his own disclosure policies, and then he's the person on NCR telling you you're not being price gouged. This really corrupts the academic discipline. And the scary thing about this too is as we privatize our higher educational institutions, private dollars have filled the void. So these academics have a lot of power because of the corporate money they're bringing in. And so if you're a person complaining about beef prices, you're a cattle rancher, and you're going against a tenure hog chair at Iowa State, it's a really warped conversation. And finally, this is something I kind of noticed writing this book. It's just this system makes bad tasting food. Especially mean dairy. Inputs matter. The New York Times just did a big ratings on butter. Irish butter was #1. So in blockbuster numbers. Guess what? Irish butter is the way we did butter 40 years ago. Cows on pasture make a better product than cows in New Mexico desert feedlot. And even I gave this talk in Ames a few months ago, and a butcher told me these animals feel so stressed inside these facilities. This is impacting the way they taste, what their internal biology. Here's a whole old Harper story that kind of hits at that. So that's kind of these big things. So now I want to focus on forbearance for the talk today. So this is the baron that started the whole thing, Iowa Select Farms. So going back to Fred Hubbell's governor campaign, I was in a dive bar in Des Moines, I think it's called Carl's. I was talking with a political person and I had heard that the largest donor was this hog farmer, Jeff and Deb Hansen. They'd given Kim Reynolds $300,000 for her race. And I was curious, like, not only that, it was this person was telling me, not only do they have a home over by Jordan Creek, but they had a home down in Naples, Florida, and they had a private jet where they flew back and forth in between without the words allegedly when pigs fly. First of all, that's good copy. But I was like, what a powerful symbol of what happened to Iowa in my lifetime. How did the largest political donor become a hog farmer with a private jet? So I worked with a buddy, Charlie Mitchell, and wrote an article for Vox about the hog baron. And so first of all, look at this photo. I mean, this is what a modern hog farm is. Meat, CAFO, metal shed, industrial animal killing, whatever you want to call that. It's pretty common now to see these dumpsters next to all of them because about 10% of pigs die inside of them. So I wrote this piece, and so this is like the hog baron's operation. This is his office over by Jordan Creek. An undercurrent in my book is, what is a farmer? Are you a farmer if your headquarters looks like a dentist clinic? And then this is one of his production facilities, I believe up in Hardin County. But look at that. That to me looks like the New Jersey Turnpike. The landscape is so dead. This should be the Tuscany of North America, yet it's incredibly devoid of life. So his operation is all based on Iowa. He's in like 2/3 of the counties in the state. Iowa, I kind of told someone the other day, I joked, I blame chicken fingers for everything. So we wrote the regulations a century ago in response to the jungle. We didn't write chicken into the regulations because there weren't commercial chicken slaughterhouses. You had a chicken in your backyard and you butchered it. So corporations down south took that exploited model to black sharecroppers and applied it to chicken production. And what happened is, and this is another undercurrent in my book, chicken started getting a lot of market share. USDA could have stepped in and said, no chicken, behave like the other meats. You can't do sharecropping. But instead, we see a race to the bottom. They call it chickenization. So hogs chickenized. It first started in North Carolina. And I tell this history in the Des Moines Register, and using the Des Moines Register archives of, so North Carolina started getting a ton of market share because you literally had a state senator write the regulations that he then exploited. And to me, it's one of the best examples of structural racism in the food system. He did in the poor black areas. In Iowa, with the manure, we injected into the soil. In North Carolina, they sprayed into the air because of the water table. So you have stories of like poor black churches having to repaint their steeples every 2 years because they turned brown. But North Carolina started getting a lot of market share, and the Business Elite of Des Moines commissioned a study. How do we maintain our #1 status? Because we want to butcher as many hogs as possible and sell as much corn and seed as possible. So they basically go, let's grow the family farm and engage in this race to the bottom. Again, USA could have stepped in and stopped this. So this whole chapter to me really is a story of regulatory capture. I would just, for context, you guys probably heard this stat by now. We have 25 million hogs. They defecate 3 times more than us. That's the manure of 75 million people. That's California, Texas, and Illinois combined. And we have gutted that regulatory system. Like the open secret in the state is if you build a facility for 2,499 hogs, it's a lower regulatory threshold, but you put 3,000 in it. No one's looking. I mean, I kind of view Iowa waterways as an open sewer at this point. So this is basically, you see this is the amount of hogs in Iowa soaring, the amount of hog farmers collapse. What tends to happen in these market moments is as a new production model takes hold, it gets all this cheap capital. Eventually there's a glut in the market, and then the small entities that doesn't have access to Wall Street capital exit the market. They tend to blame themselves, not realizing they were designed to fail. Keep in mind, this whole regulatory system is like the second you regulate hog manure like human manure, this model is no longer economically viable. And so you saw this happen it just happened in dairy and it's starting to happen now in beef. Like Iowa, our waterways, 60 to 70% too polluted to go into. And then the cancer crisis. I know a new report was just dropped yesterday. Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in America, and it's getting worse. To my knowledge, the only thing they talk about in Des Moines is it's because of tanning beds. My second variant is cargo. Cargill wasn't my original book plan, because here's the thing. I grew up around Cargill. I played soccer next to Cargill. We went to Slauson, it's next to Cargill. Was born next to a Cargill plant. Cargill's like, no one really knows who they are. They're the largest privately owned company in America. They are bigger than the Koch brothers. I view Cargill as like the modern day version of Standard Oil because it's all about the movement of grains. They move 1 in 3, 1 in 4 grains globally. Check out this prose from one of their brochures. We are the flour in your bread, the wheat in your noodles, the salt on your fries. We are the corn in your tortillas, the chocolate in your dessert, the sweetener in your soft drink. We are the oil in your salad dressing, the beef, pork, or chicken meat for dinner. We are the cotton in your clothing, the backing on your carpet, and the fertilizer in your field. That's great prose, number one. But number two, that is power. They are, here's the thing, they're not consumer facing, so you don't know who they are, but they're incredibly powerful in the food system. And the family owns like 90% of the company. To put their size in context, what they do in revenues in a year is equal to all the state tax revenues in green. And they also started in Iowa. They started up near Decorah. They're now based in Minneapolis, or a suburb, I should say. So this chapter I said is about the Farm Bill. So the setback, the original Farm Bill comes out of the Dust Bowl. Markets were glutted, farmers were engaging in destructive practices to save their land. So Iowa and Henry Wallace comes along. I think of it as like Goldilocks, where you get a little subsidy, but you have to take land out of production. And there's a cap. Here's the thing, Cargill hated it because they want to move and process as much grain as possible. Anything that limits it, they didn't like. They thought he was Marxist, yada, yada. I had to read like 1,500 pages of their family history. But turns out stable markets were good for business. They moved from a regional player to a national player during this. But they systematically try to undermine the Farm Bill since the get-go. I focus on the 1996 Farm Bill. It's where things go off the rails. I call it the Wall Street Farm Bill, where now the Farm Bill is designed for Pepsi and no one else. And here, a good example of it is crop insurance. So when you hear crop insurance, you think, oh, hurricane or like tornadoes or whatever. It's not. It's insurance for low prices. So like 60% of the premiums are paid for by taxpayers, but it only applies to certain crops, not other crops. So if you want to grow carrots, you get nothing. You want to grow corn, 60% insurance is paid for by the taxpayers. And there's also no cap. So Bill Gates is actually one of the largest owners of farmland in America. So he can get as much crop insurance to grow corn as he wants. So first of all, it pushes people into doing grains. That's why there's an overproduction of grains. I think that the best example of how this system just really undermines farmers is this stat from USDA. For every dollar you spend at the store, what does a farmer get? After the FDR reforms, all-time high, like more than 50 cents on the dollar. We are now at all-time low, like 11 cents. So first of all, imagine what rural America would be if half the money went back to it. And then also all these issues that come out of the Farm Bill, where like, for example, to me, Julie Guthman at UC Santa Cruz has done a lot of scholarship on this, where so much of the obesity crisis in America is rooted in this system, where it takes money now to be healthy in this country. We heavily subsidize chips and pop and nothing for a carrot. I think Ozempic is going to be the most fascinating thing to happen to it, because I think the most interesting data set right now is Walmart, because they have your prescription data and they have your grocery data. So they see in real time what's happening. I should also say one thing I learned too this summer is, and I just asked a banker I know in Western Iowa, why is every silo in Iowa falling apart? What Liz Garth explained to me is a family farm was like a retirement portfolio, like diversified portfolio where you had different crops going. So if one cratered, you can shift. What this system now does is it pushes people to do one or two things. So first of all, it makes them incredibly fragile. But the silo used to be is you used to grow your own feed. You used to feed your own hogs, feed your own dairy cows. Well, now we separated this where you either grow feed or you own the animal. So it makes these systems like the beauty of diversity is the resilience it breeds. And the system is really not designed for that. And finally, I ended this chapter with, I started off thinking of Cargill like Standard Oil, but I think a better comparison to Cargill is the 19th century British Empire. I love that line. Just the sun never sets in their empire. They're still in Russia. They never left Russia because guess what? You don't know who they are. And here's a little scary example of their power. Such an unknown entity is Financial Times 10 years ago did a story based on Oxfam. I think it's Oxfam research, where so Colombia had a massive civil war. 250,000 people died. one of the things they did in response to it was enact land reform. They put a cap, how much one person could own. Cargill shell companies exceeded that by 36 times. I say this because there's so much of the Cargill empire we just don't know. So JD is my coffee baron. This is my next favorite slide. So this is a secret German family. Before I show you this, keep in mind, they did not sell a single bean of coffee in America until 2012. They now sell more coffee than Starbucks. I'm at a law school, so I can nerd out. This is a private equity firm. Basically, the family engages in roll-up strategies where they see a competitive market, they throw their capital at it to get a dominant market position, and do what you do with a dominant market position. They own all these coffee brands. So like even when they bought Keurig, those little cups, they got all these brands too. A&W, Dr. Pepper, Snapple. So the family just started this new roll-up strategy over vets. They realized, and this sounds awful to say during COVID, people are economically irrational with their animals. So they've been rolling up the vet industry and buying vet care. They just got the Commissioner Khan at the formerly of the Federal Trade Commission just put a stop to that. But that's what this family does. So I use this chapter to tell the story of antitrust or anti-monopoly law in America. Fun fact, the first anti-monopoly laws in the world started in Iowa. Is Iowa farmers mad at grain elevators? This chapter I rooted in like so much of our antitrust historical thought in America comes out of this Brandeis, which is really rooted in avoiding concentrations of economic power because it corrupts the local system. And Brandeis especially hated roll-ups. No company buys another company for pro-competitive reasons. He hated inorganic growth. Like what the coffee baron did, you could not have done just decades ago in America. Fast forward, Robert Bork comes along. You guys might know him, Nixon's hatchet man. He basically comes up with a pro-consolidation framework. There's a phrase called the consumer welfare standard, where it's a fancy way of saying if I buy company A and company B, combine them, and I show that prices go down for consumers, the merger can be approved. Well, first of all, I can hire any economist to produce those numbers. It's incredibly lucrative for that profession. Here's the thing, you're always gonna have academics like that doing the bidding of the rich. I think for me personally, the second I found out, we discovered later on in the Nixon tapes, he did the Friday Night Massacre because he was guaranteed a Supreme Court seat. The second I hear that, I don't care what your scholarship is. That to me tells me you're morally bankrupt. But he ushered in this massive consolidation era in America by having this pro-consolidation framework. I should also say to that point, that phrase consumer welfare standard is such a good example of this moment because it's words that mean nothing. So much language is designed now to keep people out. It plays into people's intellectual insecurity. Think about those words. Consumer welfare standard, they mean nothing. How many hogs one person should own is not a math formula. These are moral questions that society needs to wrestle with. But we like to use this pseudoscience to mask moral judgments. That's like my personal. But also, let's go back to Lena Khan, because I think this is one of the most hopeful things right now. Is I think in food, you see one of President Biden's best and worst political appointees. She's ushering in returning to the Brandeis antitrust framework. She is kind of like a living hero, I would say, at this point. You know, she did a fertilizer consolidation hearing in Iowa this summer, got 100 people to show up. No bureaucrat gets 100 people. Her and DOJ helped stop that pending Kroger-Albertson merger. The victory against Google as monopoly is a big deal. Now they're moving to the remedy phase. But you're seeing a lot of scholarship now going back to that Brandeis framework. And like she's kind of like what you want, like where she wrote an academic article that went viral, and then she gets a position of power and utilizes it. What a radical concept. A public servant being a public servant. But even what I found fascinating about this Kroger-Albertson merger is when the executives were testifying, they admitted they were charging the most prices in small towns where they had market dominance. So think of it, the communities making the food are paying the most for it. And I want to finish, this was the hardest chapter to write because this chapter is weird. I go from like Panera Bread to my mom's bakery to the Nazis. Like it's like very, but I really want to make this point that monopolists finance fascist. Congress commissioned a report in 1947. How did it happen? And that was one of their big findings. And they wrote, so IG Farben was a chemical company in Germany where Hitler would walk, and they're the largest donor to Hitler. Hitler would walk into the room. I don't mean the crazy thing. Let me help you sell product. That the congressional reports that quote the dreams of my that donation made the quote the dreams of my come true. They ended up supplying the gas used in the chambers later on. The American military broke up that company, also Japanese companies, up after the war. So IG Farben's broke it up into 7 companies. I really recommend this book on it, Hell's Cartel. You might have heard of one of those companies. It's called Bayer Monsanto. And finally, right before I went to press, so this family has a really dark German history. They were early Nazi supporters. They engaged in slave labor. The father ended up having an affair with one of the slave laborers, having children. The children now call the company. It's fascinating and a messy story. But they atoned for their sins. They said, we won't do this again. They made a donation to charity. And right before I went to press, the Wall Street Journal reported that they still sell coffee in Russia. I think Putin is the closest modern day example to a fascist. And the fact that you're still in Russia tells me your words mean absolutely nothing. Now, Fairlife. So Fairlife is this milk. You might have seen it in the store. It's doing blockbuster numbers right now, especially that drink, because young men are obsessed with protein. Coke just bought it, and to quote one Coca-Cola executive, it's twice the price of milk for half the volume. Has a super high shelf life too. So Coke, this whole chapter is about checkoffs. I'll get more into it more in my book, but checkoffs of those programs like Got Milk. I think they really control the conversation over the food system, and they help finance that Got Milk. Driscoll's another bear in my book. I won't really talk about that today, but this whole chapter is about the offshoring of produce in America. So Driscoll's took that chicken model and applied it to berries. So Driscoll sells 1 in 3 berries, but they don't grow a single berry. They contract out production. So, and also by contracting it out to other countries outside our borders, you can evade all these labor environmental standards. So that's also why you see like 40% of your vegetables and 60% of your fruits coming from outside our borders now. Also, that food tastes awful because those berries are not engineered for taste, they're engineered for durability. JBS, so I want to talk about this baron a little bit because we'll get into antitrust a little bit more. JBS is my slaughtering baron. This chapter is wild. So Joel, Batista brothers own it. This chapter opens where they pled guilty, and I didn't know this. Meat industry is kind of what I know because this news dropped right before the 2020 election. They pled guilty to bribing over 1,800 Brazilian politicians to get cheap capital to essentially go on a monopoly buying spree. Not only I'm not talking about campaign contributions. I'm talking like they gave a Manhattan apartment to a politician. They cut a deal with the law enforcement to secretly record the president of Brazil at the time, bribing him. The president at the time thought his house was haunted, so he's living at the vice president's house. And then allegedly, so fun fact on books now, the liability down on the author. So this chapter, I got to be very careful with my words. But they tend to, they secretly recorded bribing the president, but then, and I forget the term, they knew their stock would crater the day the news was announced, so they bet against it. What's that called? Insider? Shorting. They shorted their own stock, or allegedly. This chapter to me is like the story of a child that's never been punished. And they keep pushing the envelope. They've allegedly bribed meat inspectors. Child labor. And here's the thing too. They bribed their way to monopoly level status, and we let them keep their empire. That is so scary for the rule of law. That just means it's a cost of doing business. And I don't want to feel sorry for Tyson's, but how can you compete against a company that's engaged in that type of behavior? So they're number 1 in beef, number 1 in poultry, number 2 in pork. They're the largest meat packer the world's ever seen. They have a plant down there's a few in Iowa. So these next few slides are all the brands they own. So this is slide number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. It's that illusion of choice. That's the story of the food system now, is this illusion of choice. Part of it is like different income brackets want to think they're buying a different product, even though it's the same product. This is the one that got me. So I used to work in DC, and there's a place called Old Epic Grill. Went there for lunch one day, and I saw it was like one of those things for all of our peaches from Cedar River Farms. Growing up in Cedar Rapids, I was like, oh, this must be from Cedar Rapids. I've never heard of this company. Let me check it out. Google it. Guess what? It's a fake local beef brand based in Green Lake, Colorado. They're playing into that illusion. And I found this out the other day. They're building all these fake local meat stores on the East Coast where you can think you're buying local meat. I know they're fake because that's too good. I've been to enough you don't ever see local meat stores look that nice. But it's all this whole, that's what they do. They want to have this market dominant position. When I read this chapter, I feel like my anger actually lies with Secretary Vilsack, because we know what to do here with meatpacking. We did it a century ago. We have a playbook for how to deal with this industry. What he did instead was he spent $1 billion. He took $1 billion of taxpayer money and threw it at new market entrants. First of all, I kept asking the staff, give me an example where you deconcentrated an industry by financing market entrants. You're basically lighting the money on fire. So not only that, all the major meat packers these last 4 years made acquisitions. And what's scary, to me, the scariest part is Walmart's making vertical plays into the meat industry. Because people tend to judge your grocery store based on the meat and dairy case, and Walmart was being sick of being gouged. So Walmart's building its own beef operations now in like Wichita. So not only the industries get more concentrated, he keeps giving money to JBS. Like this is a entity, and he keeps giving government contracts to JBS. You're seeing actually in Iowa, Northeast Iowa, I think Charles City, one of the companies he financed was a new chicken thing. It liquidated. And so then there was all these stories in local news being like, come get a free chicken. We have too many chickens. This company went bankrupt. No one did. So then the state of Iowa had to spend $1 million to kill all these chickens. Here's the thing. Like, we know what to do. You know what I mean? Like, we're not talking AI, we're talking hogs. And it's like the failure to actually do something. Like it was, you wanted to have the soundbite, but you don't want to actually make structural reform. And so the system actually reinforces itself. I personally think it could help contribute to the vice president's loss, because this stuff, people are being gouged. They really are being gouged at the store. And also, like, you have children working, like, we're getting almost numb to the labor abuses in these slaughtering houses. That to me is a very scary part of, like, it shouldn't be normalized that like middle schoolers are caught working in these slaughterhouses. My last bear in the book, I kind of think of Walmart as my king of kings. I didn't originally plan to write about Walmart because I found a lot of discussion on Walmart be kind of classist. But here's the thing. Their market share, they sell 1 in 3 groceries, like I said earlier. Aldi's has like a 1% market share. Trader Joe's has like a 2%. When they own Sam's Club, you add them together, that's a massive amount of market share we've never seen before in the food system. I won't go too much into this, but like they're the world's richest family, and like they own 2 NFL teams. And the thing with Walmart is, there's this old academic at Iowa State who researched when Walmart first came to Iowa, what happens. When Walmart comes to town, you don't buy more milk, you just shift your consumption. So Walmart's goal is essentially capture every dollar of America's underclass. So first it killed downtown, then it killed the mall, now it's probably gonna kill the strip malls. Because this whole chapter I frame around as Amazon and Walmart have been in an epic fight, like Godzilla versus Mothra. I was proud of that story. Well, I originally wanted to frame this chapter around, I think Walmart is the closest thing we've ever had in America to a Soviet Union style Politburo. Because you do not negotiate with Walmart. It's supply and command. And the best little example of it is when you read local news and trade press, you get the best nuggets. The Business Journal of Northwest Arkansas, basically that's all they do is cover Walmart. Walmart has a rule that if you supply to Walmart, no more than 30% of your sales can come from Walmart. I didn't understand that, so I asked people at Hy-Vee why, and they told me that's a supply chain risk management strategy. Walmart knows it's such a vulture that if you sell more than 30% to Walmart, you put yourself at the risk of bankruptcy. So it wants you on life support, but doesn't want to kill you. And it even publishes a list of suppliers that are dancing around that line. But going back to this point, so you have Walmart, they put basically banks, that's what money centers are, pharmacies, tires, they're trying out healthcare clinics, they're trying out vets. They want to capture every dollar of people. And also Walmart Online is as good as Amazon at this point. So here's the thing, where do we go from here? I don't like reading a nonfiction book and they tell you everything's bad and then tell you what to do. So that was like a big goal of mine. So my biggest thing is I want to put animals back in the land. And I think we're coming up to a fork in the road. Ethanol's gonna die. Cars are moving to EVs and hybrids. Bloomberg reported that Norway, for the first time ever, had 100% new cars sold last year being EVs. Here's the thing. The single use of corn now is ethanol. It's like 50% of the corn crop. What are you going to do when that market craters? My hope is take that land and shift it back into pasture production. Because first of all, most grains will be robotic in the future, and that's not a bad thing. But one person can only look after so many cows on land. It's better for the climate. It's better tasting food. You're restoring middle-class family farms. And I should say, what I love about giving these presentations is I gave this recently in Wisconsin, and a nice old dairy farmer told me, came up to me afterwards, told me I should change my photo, and I haven't yet because the cow shouldn't be in creeks like that. But you learn. I can't say that enough. Doing these presentations, you learn the coolest things. Like, let me skip ahead to this slide. As we phase out this old system, you got to start building a new one. And schools buy a lot. So using the power of schools to drive procurement change. And like I heard this at I kid you not, Wisconsin Dells Water Park Hotel 2 months ago. I'm a big believer. I love that notion in America of the laboratories of democracy. Like so much of the New Deal actually came out of Wisconsin. Unemployment insurance. Like you play with policy, you incubate it. Like I was telling someone earlier, it's kind of incredible that Iowa State has free buses. Like that's a really cool thing that not many other communities have. Workshop the idea, do a lot of papers on it, and then so that way other people can do it and copy it. But this is so historically in Native American areas, we just dump junk surplus food on them. What Wisconsin did, some nonprofits got together with bureaucrats to create a program where you're buying from indigenous farmers to give indigenous food to people. So you're buying like wild rice, buying bison, and all this stuff. And you can see they slowly start scaling, working out the kinks, figuring out how to do it. That's incredible. How do you like this? It's also, I feel like people crave hope right now. They want to see Americans doing good things for other Americans. To go back to the lawyers in the room, I'm a big, and I'm also married to a lawyer, is the second you have gradation, that's where lawyers make their living, is make bright line rules. So knowing that the goal of any corporate executive is vertical and horizontal integration, how do you purposely put up boundaries? So fun fact, Iowa has a Packer ban on the books. We don't enforce it, but it says if you own an animal, you cannot own the animal you slaughter. If you were to enact that simple rule, you would break up most of the meat companies. So like Smithfield, owned by the WH Group of China, is the largest hog slaughterer in America, but it's also the largest owner of hogs. Iowa basically has a consent decree where we don't enforce the law so long as Smithfield gives $100,000 to Iowa State every few years. Senator Harkin tried to do a national version of it, but that's a good pressure point because a certain AG in Iowa loves to talk about how anti-China she is, but you know she's not enforcing a certain law. The other thing to keep in mind too is Senator Klobuchar has legislation on this is looking at banning mergers after a certain threshold. Once a company gets so big, you have to prove that you can buy. You almost default to saying mergers shouldn't be approved. Actually, a really good example of this too is prohibition in a lot of the alcohol markets. Ken Burns' documentary on Prohibition is really good on this, where basically companies sold alcohol at a loss to get you drunk. They make money when you gamble and all that. All these societal ills came from it. So when we legalize alcohol again, we purposely deconcentrated the system where if you make alcohol, you distribute alcohol, and you sell alcohol are 3 different systems. And then we also carved up the distributors because you want to purposely put up boundaries. I kind of think of markets as almost like a garden. You know, you got to prune a garden because if you don't prune a garden, an invasive species takes over. So how do you put up guardrails to maintain competitive markets, knowing that the goal of a corporation is to overcome competitive markets? 4 is I think we should really rethink the Farm Bill. I think we should incentivize farm practices, not crops. We are picking favorites. I would consolidate these 3 programs into one. I also love this quote. I'm on an Eleanor Roosevelt kick right now. And she has this line, quote, "The farmers are engaged in probably the most exciting gamble that there is as a business venture." I think an underappreciated thing of this moment is the lack of dignity and work for a lot of people. When your job is hauling out dead pig bodies, imagine the trauma that you deal with all day versus being your own person, running your own farm, running your own restaurant. How much pride do you have? The other one is kind of going from like the TikTok ban. I personally think like media should not be owned by foreign entities in a country. And in the food system, a lot of the food conglomerates are non-American. I think just from a national sovereignty issue, I would purchase, that's where I lean towards. Also, that's something to like pull from, because what's really wild about the meat industry too is a lot like they take like protein, like pork is such an important protein to the Chinese diet. So there's a lot of state involvement into the corporation itself, like a lot of cheap state capital, all this kind of stuff that really kind of muddies the water. The 6th thing is rethink USDA. I used to say strip it for parts, but given the state of the world right now, I don't think that's appropriate language. But like, for example, the Federal Trade Commission has antitrust authority over every market except meatpacking. USDA has a carve out. Let's take that authority, put it under the Federal Trade Commission. Things like that. I mean, I even read Project 2025 on USD the other day, and I found myself agreeing with a few things, including taking SNAP and putting it under HHS. Number 7 is the power of journalist. Actually, fun fact. So Nina's a journalist. She's from Iowa City. I think she went to West. But see something, say something. I know that's cliche to say, but so many journalists are making nothing and moving a mile a minute. So when you see something, let them know. Here's a good example of it. I was at dinner at Elizabeth Gar's house in Western Iowa this summer. We were just talking, kibitzing, and so Iowa has this great program where for deer hunters, you can donate your hide, the dead carcass, to a meat locker. This meat locker gets subsidized by the state to process it and give free meat to the food pantries. Great program. What Liz was telling me is no one's scanning that meat for lead in the bullets. So this could be lead tainted meat being given to food pantries. I let Nina know. Nina did this massive, incredible investigation just published earlier this month, where only the state of Minnesota is scanning that meat for lead. But it's just literally, it was just one dinner conversation in Iowa in July. I sent her an email, and then now we know this. You now have this information. This is kind of the wild example, but it's one I love to use because it sticks with me. You know the movie Fargo, the mulch scene? A confinement owner was doing that, throwing his dead hogs into a mulcher and throwing them out to his field in Western Iowa. First of all, that's illegal. This older woman near Council Bluffs reported that to DNR. DNR didn't do anything because they had no resources. So you know what she did? She told the local TV news in Omaha. Guess what? It became a big story. DNR finally did something. I think especially now, sometimes you just got to take things into your own hands. Also, when you elect a president or governor, you're electing tons of appointees. Who's going to set the table? Like Commissioner Khan just didn't get that appointment. There's a lot of work by people in that space to really push her to get that appointment, to show a politician that, oh, there's actually a lot of benefit to appointing good people to these positions. Number 9 is right, like to the students in the room. I can't say this enough. This space might be broken, but there's tons to write about. So like, for example, at the grocery conference, one student wrote a paper, New Haven only has one grocery store and it's not great. So she's like, why? Why are my grocery options not great? It turns out there's all these anti-competitive land tactics going on between rental agreements. She wrote a paper on that. Another one is, so JD Schulten is a politician in Sioux City, Iowa. Ellen, she's a farmer in Western Iowa who also runs a restaurant. And what she was dealing with is the big companies like Cisco don't want to deal with local farmers. So she made her own Cisco, her own warehouse to supply restaurants in Des Moines and Omaha. And what she was proposing in the paper is just like, why not make a nonprofit version of this? Why can't this be a new thing for extension? Just to kind of help with that distribution. So like, keep in mind, so much of the food system too is rooted, we're dealing with laws that like are just so antiquated. Like dairy is my favorite little commodity because it's so complex, but our dairy program is based before we had refrigeration. That doesn't make sense now that we can refrigerate ice cream and move it. So how do we rethink the system? What should these systems be? What should these food systems look like? Because you got to know where you're trying to drive a ship, because also you're just going to be wandering the sea. And lastly, I always tell people join an organization. You can't do this alone. Be part of a group. Join the Hubble Center. The dirty secret is a lot of people fighting these industrial animal facilities are pissed off old ladies. And actually, I opened with one, Julie Dunn. Julie Dunn is, so there's one mistake to my knowledge in the book is I identified, she's from Eldora, Iowa, but I say she's from El Dorado. But Julie Dunn, she's a retired secretary and she spends her retirement fighting. She goes through every hog application, every confinement application, finds every little error. They're great as a researcher. I love working with these people because they know everything. And so the last two on this photo, so this was in Iowa Falls. One of my last book tour events was in Iowa Falls, the home of my hog baron. So this is like the one time during the book tour I got a little scared. I turned on my tracker in my phone. I told my husband if I show up in the manure pit the next day. But no, honestly, first of all, I had 50 people show up. And you're like lucky in New York City if 50 people come to a book talk. But it was mostly, half the people stayed behind afterwards to tell me, they all had these stories of like the lies they were told. They saw the empire being built. They saw the false promises. They saw it. They know the couple. And guess what? The couple moved their white collar operations to Des Moines. Writing this book my experience, most people are good people trying to make the world better. It's just a greed of a few people holding us back. But you have to figure out, like, what do you want these systems to be? It's like, I always end on, I love this slide because this is my vision. I want to focus on the labor side of the food system, because 1 in 10 Americans work in the food system. But also, like, Iowa should be the Italy of North America. This is the best soil. There's a lot of cool things going on. One of the best cheeses is made down the road here, Prairie Breeze. Focus on that. Finally, for me, what's next? I will be putting out a new. I have a new baron. Cisco is going to be my new distribution baron. They have a 50% market share in food distribution. For the antitrust people out there, they basically engage in monopolization, where they do not enter a market, they buy into a market. So I just said that's my fact checker, so I don't want to give you a hard number, but they bought nearly 300 companies. So for example, they tried to buy US Foods a decade ago, and the government rejected it, being like, this is too big. But since then, God, I wish I had my number. It's like 40 or 50 companies they bought since then, but they're small. They're like a seafood provider in Miami, Asian food provider in LA. It's these little things that don't get, but it becomes the same effect. And part of this chapter is I also want to make the point. I actually really respect the man that made Cisco. He's an American, what you think is the American success story. His father died in the Great Depression, dropped out of college to help his mom, worked at A&P, saw the coming of frozen food, saw women entering the marketplace, realizing they want to be more restaurants, created Cisco as a grocery store for restaurants because he wanted to help restaurants. And here's the thing that I realize is regulations also exist to prevent companies from themselves. And the story, this chapter ends, and I've actually had a lot of former executives cooperate with me on this one, is this man built a company, he let every warehouse do their own thing. What happens was he eventually retired. He also didn't trust consultants. He really hated consultants. What happens along, new CEO comes along and basically hires a consultant who says centralized procurement. I would say that's kind of why a lot of the foods declined. But the numbers start going down. He tried to bring this to the board. The CEO wouldn't let him, so he snuck it to the board, and then he was escorted outside the company he founded, because he had kept an office in there, and then he died a few months later. And I want to make that point because I think I view regulation as guardrails, and guardrails are really important. Because if you don't have guardrails, you have a race to the bottom. I think that's the story of the American food system right now. So on that note, by the way, it makes a great gift to anyone, the book. No, I had to I'm running out of time, but I would love to take questions from you guys. And thank you so much for coming again today.
So there are some note cards around the room, and it's feel free to wave it and come get it. We won't have time for 2 minutes. Maybe I'll start with one while we're there in the note card. More than one of these, in more than one chapter in the book, you touch on, and you did in your talk, the illusion of choice.
Yeah.
That slide with you. Do you have thought about what we might do to fix that, right? How do we tell this story to the American consumer? Is there a role for disclosure or regulation here? A role for the media? What do you think?
My personal opinion is I think a lot of people are just like, oh, education. People just know. I'm kind of over that. Most people are working a 9 to 5, barely getting by. They don't have time to know. I think it's regulators just need to do their jobs. No company should have that kind of market share through acquisitions. I don't know. I feel like there's generally a theory of change for the longest time is just education, information. For example, the calories. No one really changes their caloric intake based on the calories on the menu. I do want to say before I forget, for any students interested, I'm working with a group of folks. We are starting to put together theories of harm in antitrust. Basically, how would you bring an anti-monopoly case in the food world? We're kind of looking at the food and agriculture. Because here's the thing, when I do these talks, you hear a little gossip. One thing I heard from people is that there's a lot of bid rigging in school milk cartons. Because think if I just have a dominant market position, let's say Chicago and milk, do you think schools are paying a fair price for milk? So we're like, a lot of state AGs are very stretched thin. We don't have that many antitrust lawyers. So we're looking to put together working groups. So if you're interested, let me know. Basically, you like lay out how you do a case for a state AG to then let a state AG pick it up. So that interests you, let me know. My instinct at this moment is just do something. Focus on, like, you got to kind of play your own playbook. Because these things are, anyone that knows where things are going at this point, you know. So I just want to put that out there.
I'm going to read a question I just received. One of the main critiques of moving away from factory farming is that we won't be able to feed everyone using healthy practices. What's your response to this? Is there a way for sustainable farming to feed everyone?
So usually the people that say feed the world are the same people that like ethanol, and you can't have both. So generally when I hear that, that's what I think. I think what's interesting about the food system right now is like I was telling class earlier, our pork consumption in America is flat. We're producing more hogs, and that's for export. And it's mainly to China, Mexico. And the question at some point should be asked, why are we destroying rural Iowa to feed China and Mexico? Because basically what's happened, there was a story last year where our production costs are so low because we're not putting negative externalities into the price, that they're willing to essentially let us destroy ourselves to provide their protein. And I think that's a really big, and also you're seeing this actually right now with proteins where what's happening is beef is because of the climate crisis become much more expensive. So people are naturally shifting to chicken. I generally don't want to pick favorites in the food system, what you subsidize, what you don't. I'd rather just subsidize farm practices and let the market do what it does, because like what people like, you know what I mean? It changes so fast. Like that's why I love talking to grocery store people, because they'll start telling you the most random, like who would have thought cottage cheese would be so big right now? Like they're building a massive a plant just for cottage cheese in Boone, Iowa.
So media, big field, and I have a question about media. Is there a sustainable contemporary business model for media consistent with national security? Questions asking. I think about the decline of local media and
Well, just like back up for a second. Like we used to say going on 5 TV stations, and what you saw is the president kept raising the cap. So I think Sinclair can on like 180 now. How, like, these are constructs, like markets are constructs. How do you want them to be constructed? Right now, we let Silicon Valley take all the ad revenue, have none of the responsibility. I don't think that's like, even my Vox article went through so many layers of review. When that's posted on Facebook, that content is treated the same as some crazy wacko whatever, you know? And we're putting people who work a full-time job, 9 hours a day. People don't have the time to know what's truth, fact from fiction. I think these media markets are just, most people are living in libertarian hellscapes. Like that's what the media's become. And the scary thing with the food system now is these checkout programs finance the news. It's like in Iowa, the agribusiness reported news like KCRG at night is financed by industry. That's like being in Appalachia 100 years ago, and the coal reports coming from the coal industry, the worker report. That's where things are right now. But like so much, and then on top of it, so much of my book is because the Des Moines restaurants have a phenomenal agricultural. That's all gone. Like the example that really hit home to me in my dairy chapter, I discovered a worker died. And this is one of the largest tourist attractions in the state of Indiana. And it wasn't like I filed FOIAs. I didn't run around with a magnifying glass. It was there in the open and no one noticed it. It was just, they set up a bunch of LLCs and the public name was different than the private name. And I found it in the OSHA, I found it doing that. And so we need to structure media market in such a way where you can actually like, if you can get all the ad revenue and the responsibility, it's incredibly profitable. And that's what's been for Silicon Valley. But like, maybe we shouldn't have a model that allows that system to thrive. Maybe we should put the negative externalities into their production model. Because right now we're dealing with I think media is everything right now. Is like how we can think these constructed markets, because it doesn't matter what I say if people are consuming news through Facebook.
So I'm going to end with this question.
Yeah.
Since the book is published, have you talked to some of the people you feature? The dairy chapter made me wonder.
Mikulski's.
Okay, so were they in touch after it came out?
Eric Slosser wrote my foreword. He wrote Fast Food Nation, which is I feel like every person has that first adult book you read growing up. Fast Food Nation was mine. I literally read it working at a fast food store. I worked at Hungry Hobo, if you want to call that fast food. But he sat down and gave me the talk. Because consolidation in the book industry now, liability's on the author, there's all this. That's why I've been signing amount of citations. Because the second my lawyer husband discovered that, we cited the heck out of this book. But it used to be they would attack you publicly. They don't do that anymore. They attack you behind the scenes. So for example, like a lot of authors make their living giving speeches, they get you canceled. So Eric is like, make sure you get paid ahead of time. Like all these little things. And like the other thing, just one example of power is, I got married in Grinnell a few years ago, and I was driving to a wedding meeting, and they're building these multi-story confinements near just east of town, 5 miles. You might see them on the interstate. So China already has 10-story hog confinements. Talk about playing Russian roulette with like these. I took a picture, tweeted it out. The Des Moines Register did a story. And so the head of the Iowa Pork Association emailed my dean at Yale. Pretty long, threatening email. It was forwarded on to me, and my boss told me, don't worry about it. Just think that this happened. I know if I was at a certain land grant in the state, I would have been fired, and I would not know why. That is the world we live in now. That is why this center, with the work that's happening today, is so important here, because Iowa State is one of the biggest agricultural schools in the world, and there is no conversation over the cancer crisis in Iowa going on there. That is like, I say this, that is what I learned doing this. And also Eric told me the more attention I get for the book, actually the more protected I am. And I also personally think, given this moment in American history, if not now, then when? I'm a big believer, take your gambles when you're young, because like, I don't have a kid, so like I can do crazy things like this. But like, I had my hog variant attack me. They wrote an op-ed in the Des Moines Register, but here's the thing, they win when the status quo holds. Part of my instinct here is I wanted to put on a show. This is, I want to say political theater, but you know what I mean? Like it's, what happens is they have the capital to outlast people. And I see that, like, that's why I was so angry at Secretary Vilsack, is you had a moment in American history to make meaningful reform. And you didn't. And these moments are like, they come when they come. In policy theory, they call it punctuated equilibrium. And so, I know, I say all this because like, it's so clear the system's broken, but I really encourage you all in this room to like, think about it. Like you are in the heart of the beast right now. What should these systems be? We didn't get here overnight. And Julie Dunn always tells me this, but where do you want it to be? Like Julie always says she's doing what she does for her parents because she knows what Iowa used to be. And so, but you have to have that vision. You have to articulate it because like these systems are going to break. They're just too fragile. What's happening in the egg industry is a default thing. When you put that many animals in a shed, they're genetically similar, you're going to get it. It's going to keep happening. But at some point, these systems need to change. But what should they be? And that's why I really encourage you to like do this scholarship, do this work, be involved. And it's really, really important that you're doing this work in Iowa. So on that note, thank you guys so much.
Great.
I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to
Yeah,
give us afterwards.
Because we do have a class that comes in at 2. He'll just kind of transition out of the room. Yeah.
You like that? You like it?
Did I write it last week? Oh, I don't